Everyone okay with it? Everyone but Marion.
It's Stephanie show.
Oh. What's going on here? Hold on. Wait, it's bigger. Hold on a second, technical issues. Have to change the view.
If anyone else is missing, Darian, just let me know that so exit 3, this way is completely blocked now because someone crashed into the tag bus.
Oh,
Coming south?
Coming my way, two people just hit each other, like on the street over there. So I thought that was what was blocking him, but instead it's the tag bus and the whole exit's completely blocked. He's gonna be there.
On his phone.
I know, I just feel bad that he's like sitting.
You have to be sitting somewhere.
I know.
You don't want to be in an accident with the tag bus.
Oh my goodness, that's so bad.
Yeah, the one under the.
Yeah, you saw those two cars, right? And he's like, no, a bus. I was like, oh, so there's two.
Presentation mode, maybe?
Let them know.
Phone call completed.
Scared me.
Someone calling from the
This issue the best.
this was storm yesterday.
It always does, don't worry.
Real pitches.
We know.
Murphy's Law.
Good thing it's a cute cartoon.
Yeah.
So are you all seeing the shared screen, full screen?
Yeah, they have thumbs up.
Yes.
Maybe go to
You can't click on it, make it bigger.
Well, do we need to see it? We have it in front of us?
You don't have it.
He means like
Oh,
the
we don't have the
expense guide in the
presentation.
budget, yeah.
But we can just squint.
For the little box?
Or just not record it at this time.
Yeah, what if we stop recording it? Could we get back to the way it was?
Yeah, just do it.
All right.
For Gigi, all on the screen.
It has something to do with the sharing. That's what I tried to.
Oh, God. This world we're living in is funny. The new usually are much better at technology.
Okay, we'll hold it against you.
There we go.
We'll hold it against you.
There we go. Wait. Who did the?
And now it's not even showing.
What about the?
Minimize this one. No, it's coming up. It's coming up.
I have a question for you. Is Nithya still here? Yeah, she is, okay. That's a pretty, okay. About, where you're looking about. Yeah, yeah, she's usually
There a view?
pretty
I'm sure we
responsive.
changed the view.
Yay! Last one.
There, you made it.
Stuff is in there now, okay. Right.
All right, then. So, There's gotta be a view option.
No,
Where?
Do you have a topic?
There's no views.
Kind of heard it tested.
Right, because you shouldn't.
We just honk.
Oh, man.
It's pretty tunnel, so it was just echoing things. I think we can.
Marion, where's the presentation?
Small merchant, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't pull it out, Jim. No?
You just missed it, Bob.
Did you have to?
Mine was just a little, it was like a 5-minute difference. I was gonna be here at 8:59. And then it was.
Go back to window and see.
Everybody was stuck into that little thing on your.
So always delegate your technology.
You're.
I'm trying to get on my, I think that's just.
Breakout.
How does he get work?
Is it me or are we having problems with this?
We're having a problem.
Switch to Zoom, switch to Zoom.
Last week, she was just waiting on education.
And everything.
You should have background stuff. I was like, okay, great, you know, I was gonna start. Last week.
All right, can you guys still see it?
You guys can still see, correct?
Somebody say something because we can't see you.
Yes, we can see the front page. So you're now a manager.
It's not there.
I sent an email to Lisa.
So now we love Bob.
Yeah.
Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, guys.
Jessica, yeah, you got us.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Wait for Bob.
Nope,
Now wait for Bob.
I think he's familiar with the budgeting process.
Quiz him after.
It's been said a few times that this is about budgeting, but it's really about a number of things. It's based on the questions that I've been asked as each of you became a manager, and also the errors I've seen. They happen now and then. So I'm probably going to be repeating things you may have heard, but we have one new program manager I know of. So Stephanie Lewis, this is for you. So you know me, and you've met John Stack, the new CFO. I wanted to take the chance to introduce you to the finance group. So we'll start with the great team at Bridge Street. Folks there are Angela, Etsy, Perma, and Tamara is the manager. She's right here. This is where all the healthcare billing takes place. So that's school-based health centers, Center for Hope, Stanford Cares, and all of Family Centers healthcare, medical, dental, and mental health. They do many claims in a year. Tamara, about how many do you put through in a year?
About 30,000.
The volume's amazing with 4 people, and they're a great group, right?
They are.
Then over here at Arch Street, we have the group I'd refer more to as general accounting. We've got Yan, she pays the bills. We've got Pete, he makes sure that the money gets deposited in the bank. Natalia, who's my right hand, my left hand, and most of my right foot. She handles the billing for over 200 ECE children. All of the grants and all the contracts for our sales of service, so that's about $11 million a year. Also, she's now doing the planning and reporting for about half of our government grants. We have Karina, who is filling Emil's role. So she handles the general accounting and putting out the financial reports. And she's learning right along with John now.
That's right. She's doing a great job.
Yeah, no, we've been lucky with her. And finally, we have Nancy, who does so many things, I can't even list them here. When I can't figure something out, I ask Nancy. So I wanted to just touch on some of the basic activities that new managers get hit with. One of the first things you're going to be handling money-wise is getting bills paid. So this includes paying invoices for supplies, services, utilities, including your contractors. Now, everyone knows the difference between a contractor and an employee, right?
I'm a little sketchy on it.
Okay. Employees are on the payroll. They report to people on our payroll. They work in our facilities. They use our tools, and they follow our directions. The contractor would be an independent person that generally works for other entities in addition to us. They give us invoices. They don't do timesheets. We don't figure out how much we owe them. They figure it out for themselves.
Employees receive a W-2 and contractors receive a 1099. So now we're sort of approaching tax season.
Did that help?
Thank you, that was very informative.
Okay. For your invoices, you need to send them to accounts payable. You can do that by email to that email address. Don't send them to me. Send them to accounts payable. You might be aware that different position levels have different authority levels for the amount that they can approve. This is right out of our accounting manual. We might be looking at increasing these levels. You know, we'll keep you posted. I wanted to remind you to get your invoices in on time. This way we don't get hit with the late fee. You don't use up your credit line with the vendor. You don't irritate your vendor. It also helps finance get the books closed on time and accurately. One of the questions I hear the most is, where do I charge this expense? You know, so the answer is accomplishing. What are you doing? It's not necessarily the item you are buying. So let's take an example like professional development. It might be a seminar you send an employee to. It might be an independent contractor you bring in to train your group. It could be tuition for one of your employees. But it's also the mileage getting to the seminar and the bagels that you bring in to serve at that training session. So those were all different kinds of purchases, but the expense type is professional development. It's not a question if you're going to get it right or you're going to get it wrong. The accounting police are not going to come arrest you if you get it wrong. It's that we need to be consistent across our programs. Why is that? Look at how many there are of you. 27 programs now. And often there's more than one person in a program sending in things to be paid. But there's only one Yan. Okay. Unless we want an accounting department the size of Montana, we need you to always, oh, it's coming. Yeah, we need to be efficient and effective. We can't spend time guessing where you want that charge to go. And Yan can't spend time trying to reach back to you and ask, where do you want this charge to go? So for every disbursement, make sure you indicate what program, what building, what type of expense it is, and if it's applicable, what grant it applies to. I didn't know, some of you, I know you try to use the numeric codes. I'm okay with words. You always get the words right. Codes, you might mix up the digits. Yan knows the codes. If she sees your words, she's going to find the right thing because she's working from a drop-down list. It's not that she has to look up the number. She doesn't even have to type in the number. She's just clicking on the item in the drop-down list. So if it's something you use all the time and you know the code, that's great. But don't guess, okay? And feel free anytime to call me and ask, where should I charge this? Because I would rather be asked 100 times, where does something get charged, than have it be done wrong. That takes 10 times more time to fix than to get it right at the beginning. Now, paying employees for their work is different from paying invoices. Whether it's salaries, bonus, any kind of compensation for an extra effort, that should be communicated to human resources. You're going to need a payroll change notice for a program change, a title change, a location change. It goes to HR, not me. Is there anything you would add, Joanne?
Just, in terms of communicating with HR, we also have a group email similar to the accounts payable at familycenters.org, human resources at familycenters.org. So you'll get quicker service that way. And we just encourage you for any of these types of payroll notices to send those over to us. HR takes care of having Bob do the final signature. But if the approval signatures, first the director and the VP signature could come to us, that would be really, really helpful. And, certainly if there's any questions, you can always ask. I know there's, oftentimes sort of unique situations, and what's the best form, what's the best way to fill it out. Definitely feel free to get in touch with us.
So I just want to make one comment about that, about all that signature stuff, because it sounds so kind of bureaucratic, and one might think, why do you need all these signatures and stuff? But at the end of the year, we have to be audited. And there are multiple layers to our audit. There's a federal component, state component, and there's a general audit. And we need to have in our process throughout the year certain checks and balances, because we're spending public dollars, we're spending private dollars, and if left to our own devices, we wouldn't necessarily have these layers of bureaucratic stuff. But there really is no way around it when you are composed the way we are, with these multiple streams of funding coming in. And to please them all, we have to have old-fashioned checks and balances. So I say that because, as much as anybody else, there are days when I feel as though we're just, we've got too much bureaucratic stuff. Like, why does this, takes long because it's go here, here, here. If we do it right, the system will move it quickly. There's no sort of built-in glitch that would stop it. But I say that because as managers, we all have to understand that while we trust each other and work well with each other, we've got other authorities that we're answering to, and being audited and having checks and balances is just an absolute necessity and requirement. So thought about it when you said what you said, and it's our part of our reality.
And that's also one of those things, a lot of folks have asked for Adobe Acrobat Pro. So you have the ability to do your own signature. You have the ability to modify those PDFs that these forms are all based on. So that should help facilitate the whole process. It should actually expedite the process because we're not waiting for things to go through inter-office mail necessarily. And the more that people can get accustomed to signing things electronically and passing them around, it's really going to help with the efficiency of the whole process.
Pretty cool. Yeah. Are we good? We're good,
Yeah.
Jane?
Thank you.
Good. I do notice that often people call anything with dollar signs a budget, but every financial presentation is not a budget. We've got budgets, we've got reports. What's the difference? A budget is the plan. It's what we have in mind to happen in the future. Just like you have in your program, you have goals, or you might have a treatment plan for a client. That's what the budget is. A report is what's actually happened. How did we do? If you use the right words, it'll sound like you know what you're doing, which is always a good thing. And you won't waste finance time asking for the wrong thing. So if you're not sure, ask, okay? Let's look at a real life example. So I sent everybody their list. You either got it for your own program or maybe you got it for the whole agency. This is an output from our accounting system. And in this presentation, the first column is our plan for the year we're in, fiscal 22. The next column is how did last year actually turn out? Just for information, I put what was last year's plan. And the final column is how the year before that turned out. So I hope that brings to life for you the difference of the plan and the actual.
So Marion, on that, there's something interesting in these columns, and I want to point it out to you. So if you look at the top, the third column over, FY 2021 budget. So that was the budget that was beginning on July 1, 2020. It was put together in the winter of 2020. And the reason I'm telling you this, yes, we hadn't gotten to the middle of March. And even when we got to the middle of March, we still didn't know what that was going to mean for the next year. So when you look at that bottom number on FY 2021 budget, it's $16.5 million because that's what we envisioned our budget for 2021 was going to be. Then look over next to it at the actual, just a shade under 20 million. And it's like, how could we be that far off? Let me tell you that we're almost never that far off. That is the pandemic. And while we might have thought it would have gone the other way, and for a while we did, things that intervened in the process, 2.3 million in PPP, which nobody knew about when this budget was put together. And then we got into other services that were revenue producing.
Can you just clarify for people what PPP is?
So PPP was the Payroll Protection Plan, which the federal government put out in the middle of 2020 to try to keep the economy from collapsing and encouraging employers to keep people on the payroll even if they couldn't come into the workplace. And so we applied for and got PPP, as a lot of businesses did. Now, the good news at Family Centers, we didn't really know how it would impact us, but the good news was outside of ECE, where we had 3 months where we really couldn't be on site, but right after July 1st we were, everyone else in other programs pretty much got up almost overnight working virtually. So we did not have the fall off in revenues that we feared we might have. And they were real well-grounded fears in the beginning. But things happened so well with the virtual services That gave us a boost. And in addition, we got into things through our healthcare, running a testing site, which produced a lot of unanticipated revenue. So,
And it's cut off, but expenses came also that went with a lot of that revenue.
oh, sure, yes. Well, when you see the revenue side, you think, oh, well, it was great because it was all money that poured in. There were a lot of expenses on the bottom that went along with it. But the reason I brought it up is because if you were sitting later on looking at this and you weren't thinking about, you might think, wow, this organization has wild swings in what they budget and then what happens, but we generally don't. So that's why you see over a $3 million jump there. And of course, now we don't have those extra dollars. But another thing happened in the midst of, because you'd say, well, then we should be, this year the budget's almost $19 million. And, we were coming off just before the year at a 16.5 million. In the midst of the pandemic, we've experienced a fair amount of growth in our program areas. And that growth is now reflected in the FY21 projected budget. So we didn't fall back to 16.5 or 17 million. We moved forward. We're still not close to 20 million. We're still $1 million below that, but we're far ahead of where we were before the pandemic hit. So we've been in a growth mode. Some of you from your workload know that we're in a growth mode.
That was great, Bob. Thanks. The next slide is the presentation that you'll see more often. These come out after every quarter. Again, it's from the accounting system. This is where we monitor how we're doing, how we show how we're doing. The first column is year to date for your program, revenues and expenses. The next column is the budget year to date. And we compare what's up, what's down. The next column is last year for the same time period. Another good thing to monitor against, because you know what happened last year and what you expect this year. Just for your convenience, over on the end, we have the total budget for the year that we're in. It's just handy to have it right there.
And Mary, when you say where we are at this point in the year, again, we operate on a fiscal year, July 1 to June 30th. So it's not calendar. We're focusing everything from July 1st to now.
Right. And it's at the top of the page.
Right.
Yeah, we're not sure.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not anything that you can do anything about, but you should all keep in mind that because we operate on fiscal year July 1 to June 30th, the rest of the world doesn't necessarily operate on our year. So it creates a lot of additional work in finance when we get a budget that's a federal budget that runs from October 1 to September 30th, or another grant that's on a calendar year from January 1st to June to December 31st. So there's a lot of slicing and dicing about how much of it can go into this fiscal year and how much of it moves into another fiscal year, what can go backwards, what can go forwards. And some grants allow for some flexibility depending on if it's a private foundation or it's a government funder. But all of this stuff, you have to keep in mind, gets reconciled in finance. It appears nice and neat when it shows on our reports, but there's a lot of work behind the scenes to make it all fit. And some of those grants have very specific use and very tight parameters, and some are a little broader, all the way down to some foundation grants that say, this is for your general operating, do the best, do what you want to do with it and use it the way you need to use it. That's not how most of the state and government grants operate, which they say, we want to laser target that. So these guys, Marion and maybe now the whole team, makes sure that things land where they need to land and within those parameters. And it sounds like it's easy until you start thinking about 40 government grants and 50 private foundation grant and all that stuff. A lot of reconciling.
And I think we see it through our grant reporting, right? Because we're writing the information to report back on these grants, and we're seeing sort of the rigmarole that we go through this month, this one's due, 2 months, this one's due, right? All of those are types of dollars that are on a different cycle, and that's why they're due at different times for us.
Everything you're writing, Marion's basically reconciling and putting numbers together.
It all has to fit. And then, so, you know, what we spend our money on, what we're writing in that narrative is all parallel to what the numbers are really mean.
And those of you who have been doing it for a while know that sometimes you get close to the end of the year and there are unexpended dollars, and all of a sudden there might be a mad dash to figure out how can these be expended before they have to be returned to the source.
I'm always willing.
Go to the spot.
Yes, just
I don't have anybody online who's saying anything.
Go to the spot.
Well, if you keep going, I can skip the rest. That's because you guys, it's really good. Good and
Are you?
What?
I still need more.
She's fishing. She's fishing.
She's been
Um,
pounding it.
Can I just say this out loud, that when you all talk over each other, it cancels it out and we hear nothing.
thank
Sorry.
you. That,
Sorry, Dennis.
no, that's
It's just
valuable.
I'll text you.
It's important to know. And we'll know how to handle it. All right. So many things managers have to manage: employees, clients, funders. You know, finally, we're going to get to managing your money. So Jim Vivier said a really clever thing the other day, so of course I had to steal it. Which, the clever or the stealing? You should treat your program like it's a small business.
Somebody.
The starting point of any business venture is the financial plan. Why? Why do we do a financial plan? Can anybody throw out a reason they think that you do a financial plan?
So we don't run out of money?
Very good. Anybody else?
Keep things organized.
That's great too. If somebody wants to unmute and yell out. Oh, okay. I think Kathy really got it. It's that we want to make sure that what we have in mind is going to work, that we won't run out of money, you know, before it's done. When once the venture is underway, that's when we start the monitoring, and that's what we were seeing in those quarterly reports or any of these grant reports that Jenny mentioned. Anybody have any idea why we monitor? No idea.
In order to plan for the next year, right?
It's part.
And to make sure, again, we don't run out of money.
Or that you're spending at a pace where you'll be able to spend the money. It's not, the downside is running out. The other is holding back and not spending what you have, and then finding you've got money in the end that you could have put to work and now you could lose. So that's another reason.
There's a lot of external use, right? Showing vendors how we spend money.
Thank you, Carissa. I think we hit these all. Yeah, we have reporting to the government we have to do, whether it's for a grant or, you know, the 990 for the whole agency, like Carissa said. Often we have to tell funders how we use their money. We want to see how we're progressing against the plan. And it gives you the chance, if things are not happening the way you planned, you can adjust.
I'll also just add that as a nonprofit and mission-based organization, it holds us accountable too, which is important, you know, making sure that we're doing what we say we're doing.
For sure. For sure.
Mary, the other thing along the lines of, you know, reporting and funders and the 990 and all that stuff, keep this in mind, because this is a reality. You may do the most fabulous work imaginable in your programs with the children, with the adults, with the great outcomes. There are some funders who don't necessarily know that, and they make their decisions by just looking at 990s and audits. Those are people who are out there who are numbers people. They just look at the numbers and they evaluate the operation from that lens. So we might, on the program side, think, well, that's ridiculous. But they won't look at all of the other great stuff that you do unless the numbers that they see are in line with what they believe to be good numbers. So that's why what finance does is so critical, because there's a whole part of the world that just looks at us through what we're doing on this side.
People look at just your administrative expenses versus program expenses. If your administrative expenses are too high, they won't want to fund you. So
Just want to add one tip. If there's some expense that you really need to track, a typical example is client assistance, or it might be your purchases like the textbooks. I'd suggest keep track of it yourself. Write it on a piece of paper, keep it in an Excel file, because you'll always be ahead of finance. If you charge something on a credit card, until the credit card bill arrives and it gets posted in the accounting system, it could be 6 or 8 weeks. If you keep your own list, you're going to be very up to date. I know there's some programs that do this. Carolina, I think it's done for some of your programs. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I do. I have the client assistance budget, and I keep my own little Excel sheet so I can keep track of it.
And it's easy, right? You wouldn't call it impossible.
Yeah, I know my full budget amount, and I just track it throughout the year, what dates I'm spending, and I know how much I have left.
That's great. And again, as you saw, there's a lot of programs and a lot of expenses, and only one Marion. So
I do the same thing. So everything's in an Excel spreadsheet because I have textbooks, as Bob mentioned, and contractors and trainings. And so I know that when sometimes when Mary and I are talking about my budget or whatever, I'm ahead because it hasn't come to her yet, or, it hasn't, whatever. It's still in process. And so we're not always in sync, but now we know why. And it just helps me understand, where I'm at, basically.
and also you want to look at your planning and your budgeting. Is your business or your program, is it a smooth program that runs month to month, basically the same cost and then the same expenses, same number of employees, or is there a cycle to, so you have up and downs and you have to, keep track of your expenses, number of people you're servicing, how many people you need to service those organizations during the up period.
true. All right, so let's get to what I know a lot of people think is the biggest challenge in managing money: budgeting. I've heard it a million times. I don't know anything about budgeting. How do you you do. Everybody's budgeted something. If you've been through any of these life events, you've done budgets, right? If you've been on a diet, you've budgeted. So you all have it in you.
You've always gone over your.
Definitely on the diet. What does it take to create a good budget? It's just thinking really hard. This is where you have to think deeply and thoroughly. What are you going to need? What is it going to cost? How are you going to pay for it? This is where you have to make sure you've thought of everything. Jessica, early, you just did a major proposal with a major budget for Career Connect.
Yeah.
How long did you spend thinking about the budget?
How long did I spend thinking about it? I mean, I kind of black out on that whole time period. I moved past that, but yeah, I mean, with your assistance, it wasn't as big of a thing. I was overwhelmed and like scared of it, but I did think really hard and we got it done in a much quicker time period than I would have thought. So.
It wasn't 5 minutes. It was over a few weeks.
Yes, it was a long period, but in my panic, I thought it was like impossible, but it wasn't. But yes, you focus, you think really hard, you work together, and you get it done.
Mm-hmm. So no need to panic, right?
Yeah, I probably will again, but less.
All right, so let's get to some of the specifics of what would normally go into your budget. And this is where it was a handout I sent, a one-pager. It was just, might be handy.
The expense guide.
The expense, so you don't have to, try to make a million notes, right? So our services are people services. So people are our biggest product and our biggest cost, the salaries. You'll need to identify what types of positions you're going to need and how many of each position to accomplish what you have in mind or what you're going to do in your program. You'll need to think of what you'll pay in salaries. Now, Natalia and I can always help you figure out pay ranges that will align with the rest of the agency. We'll help you with the math, and you're not going to have to worry about that part. Something with salaries, you know who's working for you. But I promise you, if you add up the salaries of the people that are in your department or your program, it's not going to look like what you see on your financials, the things that we looked at earlier. So I'm just going to pick a simple example because I know Natalie Tochi is here. So Natalie, you have 3 people in your group, right? It's Natalie, Amy, and Claudia. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So there's 3 people, and do you have your financial handy?
Yeah, hold on one second.
I was going to ask you, how much have you got there in salaries for a year for 3 people?
So when I'm looking at salaries, am I looking at the fiscal year 2022 budget or fiscal year 2020?
The number, yes.
I'm sorry, say that again, Marion.
Just read the number in the fiscal 22 column next to salaries.
81,145.
81,000. How can it be? 3 people, $81,000 for a year of expense. The reason that happens is one of your staff is Amy. she's doing the support in early childhood. So most of her expense is in those budgets, not in Natalie's care to care budget. Same with Claudia. She's entirely in OEC PAT, so that's where that expense is. In fact, all of Natalie isn't even in care to care. Some of hers is over in OEC as well. But there's other people heavily involved in your program, Natalie, right? We couldn't do it without Dennis. So there's a piece of Dennis in that. So that's why this is true for any of you. You're going to add up your salaries. It's not going to fit because people are allocated differently, and we have executive people and sometimes other kinds of support people that are being channeled into the salary line of your program.
I just jump in real quick. You had mentioned about getting some support from finance as far as salaries. Clearly, HR has that information as well in terms of market data, salary surveys. What the ranges are within here. So certainly feel free to reach out to me in regards to those inquiries as well.
Thanks for adding that. That's great.
And just Marion does a lot of magic behind the behind the screen, because she knows all of the funding sources and has to match the funding sources. So that's why you have all these different allocations of people and expenses that Marion basically, sits there. She puts a wizard hat on and then starts playing with the numbers and the allocations. So.
What a build up, John. The next couple of items, the employee benefits and taxes, they align with the amount of salaries in your program. There's really not much you can do to affect them. Taxes a certain percentage of salaries, the same with benefits. So, generally it's going to hinge on what you're spending in salaries.
Marianne?
Yes, Jessica, yeah.
I had a question. So about the benefits in the past, I've had employees say, well, I'm not taking health insurance benefits, right? So that was a question. And I think it's helpful for like new managers to know why it's still budgeted and still important. Because, we think, oh, well, why that money could be taken over here, but it can't because it's...
That is a great question. That's a pretty sophisticated question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So yes, that's true. We have programs that are largely part-time people who might not be eligible for benefits, or as you said, some employees opt out of medical. But that's not how we do the accounting at family centers. Again, to be efficient, the benefits go as a percentage of the salaries, even as we're accounting during the year. This way we can do it automatically. We're not going program to program and figuring out who is on the health care and who is eligible for the retirement plan. It's uniform.
And the benefits aren't just medical. It's retirement plan, it's paid time off, it's like there's different things in there.
You're right. The retirement plan and the health insurance are the bulk of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's things like the unemployment insurance. I think that's it. Yeah.
Workers' comp in there.
It's actually in another line, but that's the right idea. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe they do charge it there. I don't know.
So the total gets accumulated and gets allocated on a percentage basis for us.
You can think of it like that. It's every time a bill comes in for a benefit, it's automatically distributed just like the salaries. Why it always matches so nicely. That was a great question, Jessica.
And there's oftentimes a question that comes up from managers, they're in the process of hiring a new person, and they want to know sort of what is the percentage of the cost of benefits that we use? And I know you have a magic number that I thought might be helpful to share. I don't know if that's flexed at all since the last time we spoke about it. As I recall, it was low 20%, 22, 23%, something like that.
That's right. It really hasn't changed much since I started to work here. Generally, I think of the payroll tax as 8%, and the benefits will be 11 or 12%. Thank you. The next item are contracted services. We talked a little earlier about the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. These contractors are ones that you'll hire to work directly with clients. So this is not our auditors or, you know, Gotham, the IT support. It's people like a tutor, sometimes they're clinicians. We've got
Educational consultants, NEC.
Well, it depends. If they're working directly with the child, they'd go here. If it's someone who's doing planning, never actually meeting the children, we call that a specialist, and that goes farther down. Supplies. Some programs are very supply intensive. Some have very little other than office supplies or maybe IT needs. And on the handout, there's a list of the different possibilities. Professional development, we talked about that a little earlier. This is where you make your plan for spending on training your staff, and it might come in the form of a seminar or a conference. You have the flexibility.
Sorry, Mary, going back just a little bit, are temps considered, are they under the contracted client services? And temps that may need to be hired for a certain amount of time?
Good question. It depends what they're doing, Tamara. If it's a temp, like we hired a lot of them when we were doing the testing and vaccinating, they were dealing with the clients, okay? But when we hire somebody, say, in billing to help with the filing the claims, that is not this type of contractor. We count them down in the professional administrative professionals.
So basically, you're talking about the difference between direct service contractors and non-direct service contractors.
Yeah.
Direct service is delivery of the mission.
Yes, that's perfect. So I'm up to travel, which is typically the mileage for employees getting to their work or, getting to meetings they have to go to or meeting with clients. There's less and less of that these days because so much is remote. And the last two on this slide, it's amazing to me how they are constantly mixed up with each other. Client activities, you think of it as having, fun with clients. It could be a field trip. It could be a holiday party. It could be soccer classes for ECE, graduation. It might even be a workshop for parents in one of our wraparound programs. But client assistance, that's where we're actually making a purchase or a payment on behalf of a client. It's usually because they have some emergency need. Or there's a program where we're helping people pay rent over a certain time period. Maybe they need a bed or a car seat, new baby. Is that clear for people? Any questions about that? Well, then let's just run down the things you can't really control. Telephone, yes, it is sort of derived from the number of people in your program, but all of the things on this list, there are allocations of what the agency is spending. So the phone system cost is allocated to every program. Same with office space in our buildings. It's allocated to every program. You can't really control what your program is going to be charged. Insurance, that's the agency's insurance for property protection, general liability insurance. And the overhead, that's paying for people like me and John and HR, IT support. These amounts you can let Natalia and I work out for your budget. So we just went through where money goes. But let's talk about where does money come from? And can you have any impact on it? So the first on the list are the service fees. That will be what we charge individual clients. Okay, so Kathy, for the ECE programs, that's the tuition that's charged for each child. And you can have some impact on that. Obviously, we can only have as many children as we have capacity in the classroom. But we want to have the classrooms as full as we can. And you can also impact the rates, right? Every year you look at your market rates for tuition, set our fees. But, really, it's the scholarships you give out that have the net tuition that you're going to earn for this program. With healthcare claims, that's the other big category of service fees. We want to make, increase our volume, and we want to make sure we maximize our reimbursement on each claim we put in. So I know John Mitty and Stephanie Hain, Tamara, you and all your folks work hard at that. The next category, sales of service, that's where we have contracts with other entities. The big ones I can think of are Charter Oak, all our Work Life Solutions contracts, Care to Care has a lot of these contracts. When it comes to budgeting with those, I urge you to be bold. Make sure all the costs you will need are covered, plus some money for overhead, because you need those administrative support functions to run any business.
For those of you who are familiar with certain for-profit entities and businesses, that category, sales and service, is really what would, in the for-profit world, fall under business to business, B2B. We're a business selling services to another business. And that's exactly what it is. We sell services to Kids in Crisis. They're another business. Our services may then work with direct clients, but it's not to be confused with our working directly with the client. It's a B2B, and then we work with the clients. And I think that's a good connection to know, because when somebody said in the beginning, think of your program as a small business, it really is a small business. That's why you should think of it as a small business. And there's an awful lot of overlap between what goes on in a small business in the for-profit sector and what goes on with a business in the not-for-profit sector. And I think to the extent that you understand the crosswalks between a for-profit business and a not-for-profit business, the biggest one, of course, always is that the for-profit business, no matter what kind of wonderful thing they sell or do or service, they're driven by one thing: profit at the end of the year. No profit at the end of the year, there's no business the next year. You know, that's the driver. The driver in an organization like this is the mission. The mission is the driver. But don't think that because the mission is the driver, primary driver, it's the only driver. Because again, if we don't have the revenues from some source or another to provide service, then at some point, there's no business.
Right. So it's like the co-pilot song?
Yeah, I mean, there are similarities. And we do have to operate efficiently as a business because our investors, while they may be philanthropic investors, are still looking for good investments.
That was a good way to explain the sale of service, business to business. I will definitely steal that. That's a good way to put it. It's government grants. If you have a government grant in your program, you probably know it.
You've cried.
Generally, you can think of your grant budget as a subset of your agency budget. The grant may not pay for everything that the agency might pay for. Some programs like Gigi's program, Lisa Sandstrom's program, you have more than one grant. And so then that gets a little trickier because we have to identify what grant will pay for what, because every government grant doesn't pay for everything. Foundation grants become a larger and larger element of our funding stream. I think from when I started in 2008 or 9, it's easily tripled, maybe quadrupled in dollar value. It really has grown. And the last category, general fundraising, I'd include there our annual appeal, special events. That's the world of the development group, foundation grants, and general fundraising. So how can you increase the money available? Come on, John.
Okay.
How can you make more money available for your program? So one thing is intuitive, spend carefully, right? You can also watch for offers of funding that might come through either the state or an organization that might be aligned with, like SWACA, the council, the Association of Community Health Centers. They'll publicize opportunities for funding.
And there is a state site. It's the I'm the Office of Revenue, where there's a site where all of the RFPs for programs that are being put out for bid are on a site at the Connecticut state site for Connecticut.
But I'd actually say, rather than looking at that site, the one where your funding's coming from might be a better location. So like DEMIS or OEC, Department of Public Health. Because on the one you're thinking of, there's 1,000, RFPs.
Yes, there are a lot of them, but those are the places where the hybrid RFPs will show up. So there are programs that maybe are going to be joint between Department of Transportation and Department of you pick it, Education. And one or the other might put the RFP out, but it might have a strong element for something you're doing, but you wouldn't see it. If you go to the Department of Health site, you might not see that. It might show up in the Department of Labor site. So I'm just saying, if somebody were really ambitious and they were sort of wanted to get a sense of what's really out there, and I haven't even given you that site because I can't remember I don't go to it now, but I want to say it's the Department of Revenue or some department. We can find that out.
Department. Yeah.
The purchasing department for the state.
And I'm hooked up there and I get 15 to 20 notices a day.
Well, we don't have to go there if you're monitoring it.
I send them out.
Yeah.
You know what you're making me think of? There are sort of universal opportunities like CDBG or the town of Greenwich. Development will circulate that to the leadership group. They won't get missed. Is there anything you might want to suggest, Bill, as far as?
In terms of talking to development?
Yeah.
Yeah, so since I've been overseeing development, I can say that really from the program level and development, it's a team effort across the board. You know, Lisa, you're a good example because you're sitting right next to me. We're always kind of finding new ideas, and kind of doing some mining in terms of foundation opportunities and other funding opportunities. You know, I'm in touch with a lot of folks from the program level, as is Carissa. So if you see that there's a need, or if you see something that crosses your email inbox, or you just want to kind of talk about ways that we can increase, you know, foundation and other sorts of support, you know, our door's always open. And again, we do look at this whole approach as team effort, because we need to understand what the needs are of the program so that we can start looking around and digging into foundation opportunities, start to weave in conversations that we have with funders about your needs and articulate those so that we can possibly get some additional charitable dollars into the program. So, you know, keep in communication with us, share any ideas, kind of a two-way street.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you asked that. I, at this point, really want to give a lot of credit to our leadership team, managers, directors, because I will say that it often comes down to you all being the best salesperson for the services that we're delivering. And time again, I've heard from funders and people in decision-making positions that they were just blown away by the presentation that they heard from one of you on the direct service side. And by the way, that's not something that, as articulate as those of us in executive leadership can be, we're not going to be able to replace what you can do as a direct manager or director of a program when you meet with a foundation source. Emily Siegel just met this past week with the board of Lone Pine Foundation to talk about a new concept. And while they were leaning toward funding it, her presentation cemented the deal. They were just, wow. She made it real for us and explained who's going to be served and how they're going to be served and what it means in the lives of those kids. So you have a huge role to play in development. So you're not only talking to them, you're working hand in hand with development, because at the end of the day, you're going to probably be the deal closer.
So finance and development, we're always going to be here to support you. I'm confident everyone's going to master all the things we talked about today. Very soon, John's going to be setting up meetings with Leslie, Dennis, all the programs to start the process for fiscal 23 budget. So this is your chance to think really hard about what you want and what you're going to need. So you get the budget that you want. You can't come along in December or March and say, oh, I need these. Who's going to pay for it? This is when you think of it now.
Marion,
Yes?
are we also going to be invited to those budget meetings? Or are we just giving that information? Like we typically have been in those meetings.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
John's going to coordinate it through Dennis and Leslie, not so that
I was,
each program will have the people that should be there.
in this way, I'll learn more about each program and its operations and who's involved in it and what your needs are and what we can be of assistance with too.
So, yeah, see our traditional approach. Does that help?
And please let us know as you're thinking about this process now, what information you need from us as far as, historical data. So that, we have a sense of where the current year is, where the prior year has been, and, what you're anticipating for the remainder of this year and going into next year.
Yeah, we'll have some things prepared, like, you've seen them before. Your staffing lists. We'll probably have a year-to-date report for each program for reference.
So Marion,
Might be helpful if you talked about a couple of the variations of this agency budget. And so the people begin to think about looking at that. For instance, sale of service was really high. The actual was high in 21, and then has dropped off in the budget, 22.
I think
And
that
that
was,
probably has to do with COVID, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's actually what Bob was explaining
yeah,
about
that's, I
a
think,
particular one, but I was gonna ask if there are any questions. I guess that's a question.
so Marion, before there are questions, people should think about their questions because you'll take them in a minute. But there is one comment I want to make that's kind of been brewing in my thoughts since there were references made to your overhead. And so overhead is really the cost of the administrative overcost of delivering a grant or services to the client populations. So what you really should make sure that you know is what the overhead is in your program. And as you plan for future growth, we cannot eliminate overhead altogether. We need overhead, and we need to find ways to build it in because it's complicated to deliver some of these services, and it requires more administrative elements and more finance elements, and that all becomes overhead. However, to the extent that it's possible when you're determining overhead, if you have people who are also doing overhead but delivering some services, that's a good thing. And we've always been an organization where we have managers and directors and even some executives who deliver some direct services. You don't have to become a direct service delivery primary person, but the extent that you do, that piece of you gets charged back into direct services. And that's good because that keeps down some of the overhead in your program. So your site managers who are, they're really direct service people because they're in classrooms, they're teaching staff, they're doing that. And if you have questions about this, this is a good area to review with finance. and to get guidance from Marion and the team, because we don't want to be an organization that has our overhead explode and become too big. Now, there used to be a rule of thumb around 15%. There were some, I think it's an old paradigm, but there were funders in the past who, if you exceeded 15%, you looked like you were just top heavy with administration. And Chris is shaking her head. Some foundations even have guidelines around how much overhead you can have. I don't necessarily agree with those guidelines because I think one of the things that's happened in the nonprofit sector is when they keep overhead tightly controlled and confined, they don't give us any money for research and development. So we have no R&D money in our sector. You're expected to do better every year, provide new and creative programs, and you have no ability to research and develop what those programs could be. So sometimes you have to sell that to a funder and say, look, we're in a starved environment here, and we need some money to try some new things because we can't get to the next best place with the same old solutions. So this stuff all has impact on the budget. And so it's a challenging area that we should always be thinking about, which is how can we get the adequate amount of administrative and overhead and oversight money into the budget and not look like we are leaning too heavily into overhead per se and not enough on the direct service side. That's a challenge. And I think Marion can provide a lot of guidance. And it may be in small groups, we could talk about it too, if there's an area that's a particularly challenging area. Sometimes there is. Sometimes we have mandates that are thrown at us that require more overhead because of the mandates. And then if you meet the mandates, you get punished because now you've got too much overhead for meeting the mandates. So it's some catch-22s.
But government grants, they always have some kind of cap on what we could charge for administrative expenses. It's usually 10%. And we've seen that also with foundations, right, Carissa?
Yes.
Some maybe up to 12%, but 15% rare. Yeah, thank you. That was good. Are there specific questions at this point? I don't know if anybody wants to wave or raise their hand or let me stop talking.
Mainly around the expense side, so you mentioned membership dues, that mostly like Chamber of Commerce membership dues, or mostly like
The bulk of the membership dollars, it's the agency belonging to an organization. So the Council of Family Service Agencies, an example. The community health belongs to an more than one association for community health associations. But sometimes within a program, you might have a requirement to be a member of a certain organization.
Well, like for a good example for us, it's the Association of Fundraising Professionals would probably go into the development budget.
Right. So those might be several $100s, whereas the ones I mentioned, the dues are several $1,000s.
And they're spread across.
Shared, right? Good question. Anybody else?
I think the time that you spent to prepare this presentation in sort of a educational but yet whimsical fashion, I think you did a fabulous job. And I learned a lot. And just wanted to thank you for all that effort, Marion.
You're doing some clapping online.
So I actually have a question for everybody here and everybody on the screen. You know, when Mary and I were talking throughout this process as she was pulling this together, and she asked for my opinion about the presentation, and I said, I think it's great because I think a lot of folks from the program area, when they think of budget, it's like, oh my God, it's the fear factor. And I'm curious if you all feel now more knowledgeable and less afraid of the whole budget and finance process, because I think that was the whole point. It's making it more accessible for us all so that we can, you know, do what we need to do as managers.
Somebody say yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had gotten this when I first became a manager. I think that, you know, we all transition very quickly. It's new. We were talking about orientations, like all that thrown at you, but then when you move up the line, it's also thrown at you again. And I really didn't have, like, I was taking bits and pieces in along the way, but I did not have a full understanding. You know, I've worked with Marianne, but I know new managers are like very happy to have this, and then we can continue to pass on the knowledge too. So I appreciate this so much.
Well, from a development standpoint, you know, and again, going back to the idea that, you know, from the program and development, it's a total team effort. You know, having a better understanding of your programmatic budget, you know, we're going to be doing this on Friday, right? We're going to be talking to the United Way and understanding, you know, the questions that you're going to get from a funder about your budget, and articulating it and explaining it is critical because, again, to Bob's point, you guys are the ones that are often sealing the deal from a grant perspective. So the more that you know, the more that you can answer and be confident and defend, I guess, or sell our grant requests. So it's hugely important.
But sometimes you do have to defend it to people who don't even understand it.
I just would like to say that, you know, I have a few times emailed Marianne after we get over a grant application or something to say, you know, has anyone, you know, today yet told you they were a rock star? Please let me know. And I just want to say, I hope that this presentation is great. And just like Jessica said, I wish that I'd had this, you know, 4+ years ago. But I've learned along the way from a really great teacher. And I hope that this, you know, with, you know, John's recommendation to record it, I hope that, you know, as we onboard, you know, future managers, that this is, you know, available to them, and that this, you know, in effect will be giving people the knowledge that they need, and it becomes easier for you, you know, so that not so much relies on just direct contact, that this can, you know, promote self-sufficiency for managers. So it was, I hope, all worth all the effort. I know for those of us here today, at least for me, it was just, you know, very good. Thank you.
So I want to say, thanks Bob and Marianne for bringing this to light. I've never been exposed to this information. With that said, you know, the revenue cycle department, we're not a program per se. So it's easy for Jenny to determine her budgets, her upcoming budgets. We're kind of on the back end. So, you know, I would like to maybe sit down in a smaller group with you, Marianne, John, maybe you, Bob, as to how we fit into this picture. Because we're the ones, you know, billing out claims and making the money for the healthcare programs, but where do we fit into this whole picture? So that would be great.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that it's much clearer where the program side people fit in than where the people like billing and HR and development fit in, you know, who do those kinds of things but are outside of that realm of direct service. And yes, I think that's a good discussion to have. And I'm feeling a little regretful that we haven't had this kind of a workshop earlier, but I think part of it has been connected to the fact that over the past 5 or 6 months, we've gone through an accelerated period of organizational change with a lot of shifts and creating and bringing in a number of new managers plus. So it seemed like a time when we had a critical number of people. This would be hard to do on a one-to-one basis, although there's stuff we can do on a one-to-one basis. But I also think the more trained people are at the senior level, the director level, the seasoned manager level, the easier it will be for them to guide new people being brought in. And we have to think about it and how to integrate it into future onboarding so that there's maybe more of a formalized way, because I do agree with Lisa and Jessica's comments. One day you're elevated to a manager's spot and you don't know what you need to know through osmosis. You need to get some of it in a concrete way. And so we've got to figure that out on the onboarding side.
Well, I know Leslie and I have been talking about doing like a new manager's boot camp, and topics like this should be like incorporated. And I know I've spoken to Joanne about it as well, that we should like concretize something so that when we have new managers, there's some trainings that we want them to experience and go through in order to be ready to do the job, because you become a manager and then what?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mentioned to Jenny that Fabioli, before she started, she was really excited to sort of, have a nice project to work on. And right now we're focusing on open enrollment and all of that. But once we sort of get through that, clearly pulling in some people that could be supportive in terms of putting together some, robust training plan for managers.
But I think to the earlier point, if you're about to embark on the budgeting process and you are going to be working through the chiefs and the VPs and the directors on down to the managers, this should be a part of the built-in process from year to year. And that should be your initial sort of orientation as managers, getting involved with the budgeting process.
Yeah.
Not that there aren't a lot of other, manager-related trainings and other things to do, but this should be a vehicle to help mitigate that a little bit.
Well, we talk a lot, at this table, I know Bob, you mentioned a number of times over my 5-year tenure in terms of the people sitting around this table, how it's their responsibility, for critical discussion points and decisions and learning opportunities to, sort of filter that down. And so, just to sort of echo that, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of the budgeting process.
And you probably also want to take it down even below the supervisor and manager level. Once, the budgets are complete, maybe you need to sit and just go through, I saw 27 programs up there. Maybe you go through each program and just with some of your staff too, who you see as leaders coming up the ranks, and just take them through the process so that they have a little understanding of, restrictions that you're working under, the funding sources that you're working under.
Yeah, I think that's important. It might be an overview and not such a big detail, but I've definitely seen a lot of misconceptions and things that then become rumors and stuff. And it's like, that's not even what's going on here. Like, and some people will be like, oh, research has all this millions of dollars and I can't get this thing for me. And it's like, if you just really, now that you really understand it and you're learning it, pass that knowledge along so that people understand what goes into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not a point about the rumors. I mean, that's
I mean, it's real, and we can squash it and prevent that.
Well, yeah, well, it's really a question of illuminating, what the circumstances are, because if we were to look at the programs around the table, that mix of where your money comes from, and some are really heavily funded by grants with very specific outcomes expected and activities expected and parameters around what they'll fund. We're working not only with different funding sources, but the thing we've talked about here in the past, and I guess it's worth saying again today, is we're working between different industries. Early education is sort of an industry unto itself. It's connected to the education industry, but it's a subset of it, and it has its own challenges. Healthcare is a completely different industry than our human service programs are. There's a lot of connectivity and complementarity, but they don't operate exactly the same. And I think that sometimes there's a confusion about, there's money that comes in, and there are certainly times when we have money sitting over here that we can't even fully deploy, and a lack of money over here that we have to find somehow. And that's a lot for people to understand, that you're in an organization where it's not just it's not water that's level. There are different pots, and we have limited capacity, but some capacity. It's like having a reservoir system, and some of your reservoirs are nice and full, and then downstate, the reservoirs aren't so full. But you can't just send a tap directly down and make them all level. We have things we can do and can't do. So it's important to understand that there are differentials that we live with, and that's part of a reality. And then there are ways in which we try to mitigate the shifts. Recently, I'll give you an example. Recently, some of the state-funded or federally funded programs started pushing out COLAs. Everybody knows what a COLA is. It's cost of living adjustment. COLAs come, and sometimes they don't come for a long time. And, the state has a little bit of money, and all of a sudden COLAs are flowing. And you're on the recipient end as an organization, but you have to figure out, so how do we deal with the COLAs over here and nothing over here? And that's a challenge for us as leaders, to sort of, and we're not looking to hide that or keep it behind closed doors. We're willing to talk about it out in the open, and the place to talk about it really is this group, the leadership group, so that everybody understands, so that there are no rumors, that it's not that group is the favored group and they just got increases.
Right.
And over here, we're sort of like not cared for. I'm just trying to put it on so that I don't identify you as the favorite one. But this is what rolls around all the time. And the best way to deal with it is to be open in a meeting like this, or meetings with your staff, so that if you've got rumors floating around and you don't even have at that point in time all of the information, it's easy to say, hey, this is something that we probably should have a discussion about. I want to get more information. We'll have this discussion next week. And there are people you can come to, everyone from me on to the rest of the executive group or whoever, and find out what's going on with, that group getting new perks or money, and we're not getting anything. And then you can find out what the situation is. And maybe it's a timing issue, or maybe it's a funding issue, but it's generally not a favoritism issue.
Right.
I think this is where we play a key role as leaders, because the leadership really makes or breaks the image to the staff of what's going on. And I've unfortunately seen both sides of it. While being in the agency, I've seen leaders that go right into the whole gossip mill trail with the staff, which isn't helpful. And I've been on the side of just clarifying for some staff, especially like when I first arrived here, my longer term staff, there was this misnomer about like family centers and all this money. And, so the minute it came to me, I was like, oh no, come here, let's have a conversation. Let me talk to you about how the program you're in only really covers salaries and how much fundraising has to happen to keep your program afloat. And people were like floored. But I think it's information that kind of either was withheld or wasn't clarified. I think as leaders, we do hear things, and it's important to dispel those myths, because we do make or break that staff satisfaction piece and how people feel working within our agency. And it's so important. And either because it's a little intimidating, you don't want to get into a conversation, it's easy to sort of turn a blind eye, but that doesn't help us. It just allows that, cancer to grow within us. And it doesn't help us at the end of the day, because we want our staff to be happy. We want them to have information. We want them to do, the work to the best of their ability. And the more knowledge they have, the better they are for it.
Sorry, can you guys just remember to pass around the speaker so we can hear you?
Yeah.
Speak into it.
Sorry. She's already done.
Sure, we'll see who's gonna speak next. Sorry.
If you didn't hear it, like the main thing was that we are going, like, it's our job to be that missing piece between executive and leadership and our staff, and to make sure that everyone understands and we dispel myths before it turns into a big issue. Summary?
Yeah.
We are still recording. We can edit it.
We can cut this part.
That's the part where you're the favorite.
Even the favorite part, but everything else we'll cut.
Speaking of budgets, are better speakers in the budget? Now that we have a hybrid work culture?
More speakers.
What was that, Bob?
That's what we're thinking really hard about right now.
So, I guess it's a, yeah, can you hear me, Stephanie?
Now I
Among
can.
others? Yeah. I'm not, we have these little speakers. I'm not sure how well they actually work or where I should be talking into. It's a square, it's not really. But I think we could certainly look into that if we're going to be doing more hybrids, especially in this space. It probably would be helpful if we had like 5 or 6 of these, although it only came with 2, but we might be able to get more. And I'll push that over to Mr. Vivier and his crowd of IT people.
Right. If we want to support a hybrid work
He doesn't
culture,
look
we probably should
happy.
get into that.
He doesn't look happy, but I'll pass this on to him so he can say something.
And is Bob like really clear when we're speaking right here? Is it really clear or still hard to hear? Really clear.
I can hear you, Jessica, when it's in front of you, and Bob when it's in front of you. I don't want to speak for everybody on here, but it's not the first time I've heard these complaints. So I'm just saying, we have transitioned into a new workforce that is a remote workforce. Yes.
I think it's also Ring Central is not.
Please stop. Okay, I've been zooming the camera around the room because this is, when we got this camera, this was early on in the process. This was long before COVID or any of this was sort of on the map. Any of you who've worked upstairs in the library know that there's a dynamic camera up there that follows the speaker around and that will automatically expand. We've got one of those on order for the community room down here that will also have an improved speaker on it. I would love to get rid of these little speakers because I think the technology has improved to the point where we don't need to do this anymore. So, but we'll try it out with the other, when the new camera arrives and when the new setup gets put in here, we'll try it out and we'll see if it improves with that. In terms of Ring Central, we pay a lot of money for Ring Central, and if we don't have Ring Central, we'll have another program that's going to cost us a lot of money and that we'll try and optimize. I know that Zoom is, more the industry standard. It's, a lot of it comes back to the wiring and the amount of data that's traveling over the lines. So I'll talk to the IT folks about improving that as much as possible. But thanks for your patience. We got a lot of people who are trying to get heard and get put into the conversation here. So we'll try and do the best that we can.
Anything else in our last 10 minutes, Mr. Arl?
For those of you who are in the room, okay. For those of you who are here and present, Tyler upstairs tells me that he has clothes for children and young adults and some toys for young children to distribute. So if there's any interest after this meeting, go up and see Tyler, and you will be able to claim some of that.
And for those of you that are remote, if you wanted to come visit Tyler, you can see what's left. First come, first serve.
Also wanted to mention if any of your clients might have a need for a desk as well as a twin bed with drawers under it. Okay, I'll talk to you offline. Perfect.
It's okay.
All right, good. Thank you.
I just have one more thing to throw out to everybody to consider, and I know this is a bit far off, but one of our board members is involved with the Friends of Greenwich Library, and they're bringing in a national dance troupe in October at the new Berkeley Auditorium, and they're offering a number of tickets. She was thinking it's primarily something that would be more appropriate for adults. So if there are any adults in your program that might be interested in attending a professional dance troupe at the Greenwich Library Auditorium, I'll send the information out via email, but I think it's sometime in October. It's a Saturday in October. So again, I know it's very far off, but she was very excited to offer this opportunity to any of our clients who are willing to go and might be interested in some cultural development and, you know, have an opportunity to see something that they might not otherwise have an opportunity to be exposed to. So if you have any interest, let me know and I can fill you in on the details.
So in the last couple of minutes, I would just open it up and ask if anyone has anything going on in particular that they would like to share with this whole group. Okay, well, if there isn't anything to be shared, I want to once again thank Marion for this excellent presentation and workshop. And we can move on and have a wonderful and productive day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Kelly. So for the few of us that are attending the 11:15, my recommendation is just to stay here. We can just zoom into that meeting and let's
Is this over?